Hey YouTube, in this video we're talking about how to build a weekly program based on your individual weaknesses as requested by someone in the comments. So this one is obviously complex. I can't go into too much detail purely because this is something that's individual to yourself. I can't say what's worked for me and know or guarantee it's going to work for you. I can only give you certain things, certain things that you can do that will help you improve. This is, if you notice as well, this is generally how my entire channel is, because I don't want to give you something specific that I know isn't actually specific, that won't help you if I can help it. Because if it's something specific and this isn't a weakness for you, then not only am I wasting time for you, I'm holding you back on your potential progress. So generally, I try to stay away from giving anything specific on how to improve. But if you want something specific on how to improve, there's two places you can go to figure out what your actual weaknesses are. And this is, speak to yourself, listen to your body, figure out where the weaknesses actually are, identify them. And the other one being your coach, with your coach being the number one, because your coach will know what your weaknesses are. If they haven't told you yet, then you just need to ask. Reason being, your coach has seen you sprint hundreds of times over many months, and he or she knows what you need to work on to improve. And if they're really good, they won't just tell you, okay, well, you need to just push better, or you need to just lift up your knees better, because these can be bad cues. But they'll tell you is why you're not able to get into the positions you want to be getting into. For example, why you can't get into a low angle as you push out the blocks, why your knee bends as you're upright, and why you can't produce much force, and other questions like this. But if you're not going to speak to your coach, which by the way I would highly recommend you do, because your coach will allow you to progress the fastest, because unless you are a verified certified coach, the chances of you spotting your problems are low. And even if you are a coach, still your eyes can't see what someone else's eyes can see. Doesn't matter how good you are, unless you literally can identify every single muscle in your body and know exactly how they work, whether you're using them or not, your coach is the best answer. But if you are gonna try and do some work by yourself, I'm not gonna say you're not gonna go to your coach, because realistically you should be going to your coach. If your coach can't answer this question, a good chance you may need to change coaches, unless they say you don't have any weaknesses and you know yourself you don't have any weaknesses. But generally, that's just not true. Everyone has weaknesses. So you may want to consider, this could be a question that you ask your coach, and it could be a make or break between whether you keep this coach or you change. But if you're going to ask yourself what you need to focus on to improve, then you need to understand two things. All athletes are either force deficient or velocity deficient. What that essentially means is, if you're force deficient, this essentially means that your start isn't as powerful as it could be, and you're just a pure top speed athlete. And if you're velocity deficient, then this means the opposite. Your start is really good, but you're very poor when it comes to getting to top speed and maintaining it. Obviously, if you're a slow sprinter, this hasn't been locked in yet, so this can be rewritten essentially. Even if you are a really fast sprinter like sub 10, this can be rewritten, but it's going to be harder. But if you're not anywhere close to that, then these are just minor problems that you can grow. It's important to figure out which one you are, so you know what you need to focus on. Because if you're force deficient, then this means that you're going to have to be focusing a lot more on your block starts. Because if you're force deficient, this essentially means your start is all right, but you start to really pick up speed once you come out of the blocks. And if you're velocity deficient, then you essentially get up to speed once you've come out your drive phase. You're already at speed essentially. There's no bit of continuing to accelerate whilst you're at upright sprinting, compared to a force deficient sprinter who would be continuing to accelerate once they've gotten to upright sprinting. In a really good 100-meter race, you'd want to be able to have the pros of both and none of the cons. So you want to have a really strong block start, really strong drive phase, and you want to be able to push whilst you're upright a bit more than longer, so that you're able to hit top speed. later than you would in the race, because the later you hit top speed, then the more likely you are to win the race, as long as everyone else has roughly around the same top speed, for reasons I've already put in other videos. So what does this mean? This means you're going to have to identify which one this is and focus on it. If you're more velocity deficient, this means, like I said, that your upright sprinting mechanics probably aren't the best, which means you're going to have to focus on refining these. And there are some other factors that can affect this as well. For example, if you're a velocity deficient sprinter, so your starts are really good, but your ending is poor, then most likely, if you are sprinting correctly, you have that elastic potential and you're realizing that elastic potential, but your body isn't able to sustain the elastic potential that you produce. So what this essentially means is, let's say you're doing pogos. You do pogos, and for the first few pogos, there's a lot of power, a lot of power. But as you start to get further and further into it, you feel the power just decrease, it just tanks, it just drops. How vertical you get drops, and all these other problems. You can't feel as much elasticity as before. You feel like you're using your muscles more than you were when you weren't doing it. This would be an example of you being velocity deficient. Obviously a crude example, but it'd be an example nonetheless, because your body isn't able to push you consistently for as long as you'd want. Because if you can't even do that for 10 seconds, then if your PB isn't even close to 10 seconds, then that would show you, well, maybe not so much not close to 10 seconds, most likely it is, but we're talking about seconds here, not milliseconds. Then that would show that you have a problem that you need to focus on, which is getting your tendons more elastic. And if you're force deficient, good chance, again, just like how it would be with a velocity deficient sprinter, that it could be a form problem. Because if you're velocity deficient, then there's a good chance that you come out of blocks, and when you're coming out of blocks, you're not trying to build momentum. So you're just trying to get speed, and you get to speed really quickly, but because you're getting up to speed, your body still has to open up. Because when you come out of blocks, if you do it properly, you build momentum, your stride length, they just open up the more you step, so you're able to continue to push. That's how an ideal 100-meter would look. I'm not going to even talk about form. Doesn't matter how crude the 100-meter is, but as long as your stride length goes from tiny to large to maximum, and you hold that, that's how the ideal 100-meter race would look like. But if your stride length goes from tiny, stride frequency stays high, then you continue trying to hold that, then it's not going to work. Reason being is you're not hitting your maximal potential in the speed area, because if this happens, you could be going faster, but you're not optimizing your block starts to allow you to go faster. You're trying to win at 30 meters or 60 meters instead of trying to win at the 100-meter mark, which is where you're actually trying to win. And this is happening because your stride length isn't opening up. You're not trying to build momentum, and your body has gotten to such a high frequency that it feels weird to try and slow down the frequency and increase the stride length. Reason being is, when you're sprinting, the main focus is usually on widening up your stride length, and then its frequency, and then you do both at the same time, roughly, if this was an ideal race. But most people, they focus on widening their stride length to the maximum, and then you just increase the frequency afterwards, or slightly with a minor focus on the frequency until the stride length's been maximized, and then they continue. But if you're not doing that, then that would go to show that there's a problem that you need to be working on. Because think about it like this: you're not really going anywhere, but you're putting in so much effort to travel because your frequency is so high, which means you're wasting a lot of energy because you're putting in so much effort to try and get down 100 meters. Like, you might be taking 70 steps compared to just taking 50, which you could do, which would allow you to sprint 100 meters with less effort. And if you're not doing that, then there's going to be a problem for you, which means in that scenario, you need to work on your form, figure out how to open up properly, and there's a good chance that you also still need to work on your tendons and making sure they're still elastic. Though it does vary depending on what athlete we're speaking about, so this might not be a problem. If you're force deficient, then this isn't so much of a problem. It is a problem, obviously, but you're in a much better position than a velocity deficient sprinter. Reason being is, if you're force deficient, all you really need to do is focus on block starts. Reason being is, velocity deficient sprinters, in my experience anyway, they seem to have a very much easier time getting up to speed out of their drive phase and holding that, which is obviously makes sense because they're more top speed sprinters. But the reason why that is because their block starts are just so poor usually that they just pop up, or not even they just maybe it's not even that they pop up, but there's no force being generated, so their body essentially just gives up and then come up, and then they have to do all of the work whilst they're upright. So their body's used to being upright and it's set a really strong foundation. So when they starts to, if they have poor form when it comes to fixing upright sprinting mechanics, is generally, it's not really much of a struggle. It's more of a be patient with it, and you're gonna have really good upright mechanics. When it comes to fixing your block starts, this is a bit more iffy because they need to, because they're force deficient. So what they need to focus on is doing what they do when they're upright, but at an angle. And that can feel weird because when you're upright, you're cycling still. But when you're coming out of the blocks at an angle, you're pistoning. Your steps are going forwards, forwards, and backwards. And it needs to be in a flowing motion, just like how it would be when you're upright. But it also needs to take time. You need to build momentum. And this can be confusing to understand, but once you understand how to sprint properly out of the blocks, you're still as a top speed athlete. You might still be force deficient, but the problem isn't so glaringly obvious. For example, when I first started off my 100-meter season, because I'm pretty sure I'm force deficient. When I first started on my season for the 100 meters, I was winning, but I was winning from dead last. I had to literally pass everyone until I could win. Now I'm consistently at the front or near the front compared to how I used to be at the back. I went from being at the back to the middle to the front. And it's just literally would go to show, I have it on my Instagram as well. You can literally see my block starts progress to the point where my ability to push out with my form, which has also improved, has gotten so well to the point where I can actually be at the front of the pack on 100 meters. So the back, to the point where I literally don't see anyone other than 2 or 3 people, usually 2, who are on par with me, who I need to beat. Other than that, it's just a really easy race. If those few people disappeared, I would be winning from the gun until the end. And once a force deficient sprinter can figure out how to pull that off, then the only way up is up, essentially, because the hardest part of the 100 meters is maintaining, well, also getting up to speed, but maintaining your speed and stopping deceleration. But if you're used to doing that, or more specifically, if you're used to getting to speed late, then deceleration isn't much of a problem. And if you can sustain that whilst also improving your block starts, deceleration again becomes less of a problem because you've shrunk the amount of time you have to decelerate by a lot because you focused on momentum as you came out the blocks. You're already good at maintaining your speed because if you're winning these races, or if you're coming close to winning these races every single time, then you have to be good at maintaining your speed because your form has to be good enough or you will just fade. You wouldn't be a top-end sprinter if this wasn't your strong suit. You're just going to improve drastically once you figure out your blocks, because the blocks were the hardest part for you, essentially. And the blocks will affect about 50 to 60 meters of your race, the start part. But the final 40 meters where you shine. And if you're really force deficient, but you're really good at getting to speed whilst you're upright, these 40 meters, they may not seem long to a lot of people, but to you, they are like that sweet spot. Because if you are force deficient and everyone's in front of you here, but you're just here, it's like, yeah, that 40 meters is just past. You can generally tell someone's force deficient when you watch a video of them. Not so much the elites, because for them, they have different problems. It's more complex. But for less skilled sprinters, you can usually tell whether they're force deficient by how a race goes if this athlete wins, because usually they'll like be at the back or near the like mid pack of the race. And then whoever's the front runner, this is usually the velocity deficient sprinter. It's not saying a velocity deficient sprinter can't still win a race, but it's because they've gotten to speed so early and they're not really good with maintaining their speed. What will end up happening is that force deficient sprinter will just pass the velocity deficient sprinter like they're standing still. They literally just go straight like this. Like this is the force deficient, and they'll just go straight like that and just continue to go. If you could make it so that you don't have to pass anyone, but you're already winning, this would obviously be very good for you. And now that I've gotten that out of the way, how would you actually build a workout for yourself in a week, every week, so that you can improve? And once you've identified whether you're force deficient or velocity deficient, there are tests that you can do. I'm going to put a video in the description if I can remember. It's by Cody Bidlow of Athlete X. He did a video on this, which is really good. If you can figure out which one you are, now it's just a case of, okay, have you spoken to your coach? If you've spoken to your coach, he or she's already told you what you need to do. Now you just need to do that stuff. And if you have to figure out for yourself, then you need to do what you must do to improve. So generally, it's just form. Most of the time, regardless of whether you're force or velocity deficient, you just need to focus on your form, because if you just work on your form, this will become less of a problem. Reason being is your body's going to adapt to producing force in the more correct biomechanics. It's going to feel iffy at the beginning, but once your body figures out how to do it properly, you're going to be able to produce more and more and more force. You're going to get better and better and better at it. If you're velocity deficient, form whilst you're upright. That's really the focus here. And regardless of whether you're force or velocity deficient, I generally believe that strengthening your gluteal muscles, so this is your hips and your glutes, is really important, because when you're sprinting, these are like the muscles that are actually propelling you forwards with every single step. You're only as strong as your weakest link, and if your hips are your weakest link, then you're going to be having a problem. But once you've figured out what you need to work on, you just need to grease the groove. If you never heard of that term, then generally this is just when you just do something as often as possible, but it's not really in a high volume. For example, when people are figuring out how to get to 10 pull-ups from 0 to 10, you'll hear people talking about greasing the groove or trying to increase their pull-up amount or whatever. They'll talk about greasing the groove, which is essentially throughout the day you just do just do that exercise, and then for a bit, and that's it. So for pull-ups, it could literally be like 3 pull-ups, and then that's you done for the day, regardless of whether it's negatives or not. And then the same thing here, though for sprinting, you have to be more careful depending on what you are doing. For example, if it's form training, then you're going to have to be very, very careful. You can't overtax your central nervous system, because you're trying to teach it how to move better. And once you teach it how to move better, it's going to get more taxed, because this better movement pattern is allowing your body to sprint harder. So as your body learns how to sprint harder, the volume you're allowed to do is going to decrease. But if it's something more muscular wise, so this is improving like your hip, the strength of your hips, and improving your mobility, for example, then this is a time where you could grease the groove. Like, for example, you could work out your hips. Then if you also lacking hip mobility, then you just try and do some active stretches, strengthen, try and get more mobile, so you can get better positions, so you can improve your stride length and your stride frequency, and the amount of rate of force production you're able to produce as you improve. And just generally things like that. For example, you might also do what I like. Generally, you might just do stuff like, whilst you're warming up, you might add in something where you just do something that will improve one of the problems you have. For example, if you're, like I said, continue to use hips. If the problem you have is you have weak hips, then you might do some like warm-up sets that are actually working the muscles before you actually go to sprint, so you're able to strengthen that up. And you might also do that whilst you're off, when you're warming down. If you also lack a mobility, then you're going to work on mobility. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. All that matters is that you do it enough, and you incorporate it in some point throughout your day or throughout your training sessions. This is the main thing. You don't really want to overdo it. Don't want to make it into some big thing. You just want to continue to do what you normally do, but just add that tiny bit extra into it. Because even if this is the last day of your season, which if you know it's the last day of your season, then there isn't really much progress you can make. But even if it was the last day of your season, you don't want to overdo it, because if you overdo it, your body will quit on you eventually. I don't care if you think your mind's made out of steel and you can just push through. Eventually, your body will quit on you. Once that happens, you're going to stop doing this. But what we want to do is we want to continue to do this, and we want to make this ingrained. We want to make this a habit. We want it to be like, oh, I should really be doing this right now. And we go do it because I actually want to. Instead of it being like, yeah, if I want to improve, I need to do this. Make it something that you naturally do. Try and make it like breathing. So don't really modify what you already have, just slightly add to it in the smallest of quantities. For example, if it was working on mobility, then you could literally be, if you stretch for 30 minutes after your training sessions, then add in an extra 5 minutes where you just focus on whatever problem that you have. If it's a mobility problem, and if you normally go to the gym, you do what you normally do in the gym, though do be like careful, identify what things you are doing in the gym that you might not need to be doing, because it can get taxing after a while. For example, if you have really strong quads, there's no point in doing crazy amount of squats, but if you have weak quads, then squats is all for you. But identify what you need to do, and then I generally, for me, I don't do before my workouts, I do afterwards. Just go and hit whatever problem you have. This is usually where I work on, when I'm not on the track, this is usually where I work on my form. I'll bring in a resistance band, and then I'll just try and work on my upright form, or coming out of the blocks. I've never really done coming out of the blocks, but when I was focused, when I was trying to improve my form in an upright position, I used to always do this a lot, and just focus on your form there. And then if you have another problem, that's actually a muscular problem, then do some extra time on that muscle if you haven't already. For example, for me, it was hips. Most sprinters, they have weak hips. It's just a general problem, because everyone always sit down a lot. In fact, I'm sitting down right now. But then I just go and I do a lot of work on trying to improve my hips. And when it was a muscle problem, I had this thing where I'd use a machine, and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to continue doing this machine every single day. For me, it was every single day, because I used to go to the gym every single day. Or every single time I'm going to the gym until I've maxed out this machine. Because if this is something holding me back, this is my weakest link, and I can literally basically see myself improve on the track in my head. It wasn't directly correlated, but I could always imagine that as I'm able to increase the weight until I've hit the maximum load for 10 reps, be like, okay, this is the best I can do. I've improved well enough that this isn't a weakness anymore, or at the very least, it's not glaringly obvious as it used to be. There's more weaknesses that I need to focus on, so now I can identify that. And once I've got that, I'll continue to strengthen the weakness, because there's not really much of a weakness anymore, unless there's other ranges of motions I need to work on. But I continue to strengthen the weakness every now and then, not every single session, but every now and then, so I can maintain what I worked on, because I don't want to not do it and let it go away. However, with hips, once you go on your hips to a certain level of strength, for me, maxing out the machines, sprinting will be able to sustain that hip strength, because now you're putting in that much force through your hips as you tried to do, but now it's actually going to work. And now that your hips are going stronger, you're able to put more force that you already had, so your hips are going to sustain the strength they've already developed. If it's a muscular weakness, again, I generally stay within 3x3. I wouldn't go any higher, other than when I'm trying to increase the weight a bit. But that's usually like later on in the reps, later on in like the weights, when it's heavier and heavier and heavier, and I'm trying to get to that 10 reps for the heaviest weight that I've decided on. Other than that, again, just maintain what you already do. There's no reason to overdo it, because when you start to overdo it, you might see progress, you might not see progress as fast as you want to, and it's going to get in your head. But if you just understand that I just need to continue to do what I do, and before I even realize, in this scenario anyway, I'm going to improve drastically, then you just continue to do what you already do and just slightly add on. Because it happens a lot, I've noticed as well, where coaches will give you stuff to do, and you're always like, if my coach is giving this to me, this is going to help me improve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this as much as I possibly can. And if you do it beyond a range you're incapable of, then you're just going to burn out. You're going to stop, you're going to quit, because it's going to take up too much time, and you've got other stuff to do. But if you do it in a manageable range that you can do consistently, and you continue to do that over and over and over again, you're going to burn out. You're going to burn out less, and you're going to be able to sustain this load, so it'll be easy for it to become a habit. And then the problem you had will fade away, which is the goal here, to eliminate the weaknesses you had and make them go away. There's no point in putting in a lot of work in 1 or 2 weeks if you can't improve in 1 or 2 weeks. If it's a muscle, maybe you can improve in 2 weeks, but by how much, and will you continue to improve after that? But if it's something that will take time, like mobility, or improving your form, or getting the form right in general, then you need to take more time. You need to understand, let me just grease the groove. Let me just do it when I can. For example, with block starts, if you need to improve your block starts, it doesn't matter what training session you have, you can do block starts after it. if you can. If you're not fatigued, because again, don't overdo it. If you are fatigued, don't do something that's going to help you improve this if he's going to interfere with your central nervous system, because you want your central nervous system to adapt and adjust to what you're doing. You don't want to overload it and confuse it, because yes, you do want to confuse the central nervous system so the connections can get better, but you don't want to confuse it too much to the point where it's like just strands of string and it doesn't know what goes where, because that's not going to help you get better. You're going to think, yeah, I was very productive and I'm doing this for a while, I want to improve, but quality overrides quantity every single time, and the more quantity you put in, the more your quality is going to decrease. So you want to make sure you're careful of what you're doing. If you only train 2 times a week, then don't think that's too little time to be focusing on your weaknesses. If you really think it is, add in an extra day, but just do that and just do a tiny amount, just grease the groove. As long as you grease the groove and you do your work, your weaknesses will start to fade away over time. And if you have weaknesses in the sprinting, you're only as good as them, and the more they start to fade away, the faster you can improve. And as long as you're consistent with them, these problems can drop very, very low times. Well, they can drop times over your 100 very, very quickly. And as you start to adapt to other sprints, same thing there. So it's important that you figure out what your weaknesses are and you address them, but you address them in a sustainable manner. And you make sure you don't just get people telling you what to do if they aren't qualified. Make sure you get someone like a coach who can actually look at you and say, this is your problem, work on this, that, and they tell you what to actually do. And once you've got that, just continue to stay consistent, and over time these weaknesses you have will go away as the weeks progress, the months progress, and as the seasons go by, until they're no longer your problems and you're focusing on more minor problems that will give you even bigger returns later on. If you like my video, like the video, let me know in the comments section below. Check the description, because anything I forget to say in the video, I always put in the description. And if you like my content, subscribe. Helps the channel out a lot. I post every 2 days at 1 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. If you don't know when that is, just hit the bell and then you'll be notified instantly.